Today we got to sit down with Fredrick Redd, who is the Chief Business Development Officer at PACO Group, a man of extreme talents and some that you probably won't expect to hear, but a man with a lot of wisdom, and the discussion was something where I personally learned a lot of life lessons, but also some fundamentals about leadership and construction. So let's jump into it. So Fred, thank you very much for coming on the CPC. We're delighted to have you on.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to having a robust discussion.
Superb, great. So look, we'll jump straight in. Obviously, you've built a career in infrastructure and leadership. You know, where did your journey into construction and project management kind of works begin?
Oh, that's a great question. It started straight out of college. I took a job as at the time I graduated and it was in a recession, and I took a job as a draftsman, which within 2 weeks I turned it into an engineering position, and it gave me great experience on doing project engineering, going out in the field, and I loved it. And then from there on, I just sort of built my career with like project engineering and construction. Then I was teaching, and then I came back to teaching to do more hands-on projects in the transportation infrastructure, and then it just snowballed from there. But the point being is, getting experience from the ground up and taking a job that maybe some engineers wouldn't have done, but learning how to put together construction documents was very valuable later on in my career, which I didn't realize at the time.
And was it always the kind of consultancy design phase that you were kind of interested in? Because obviously you've got the contracting and actual construction elements as such.
Correct. So my exposure to doing monitoring construction throughout my career led me to become a general manager for a construction company for a few years, where I'm leading a team and we're working on 4 or 5 projects concurrently, and I'm the project executive and I'm going out in the field. I loved it. And the difference between the design side and the construction side is a lot more dynamic, and it's a super fast pace. And you have to make quick decisions because you have a crew out there and they're making money, and every second that you delay on a decision will impact your bottom line. So I love that part of it, and problem solving and really making quick decisions.
So my brother-in-law's a facade engineer, and he's bounced in between the two, and we see that a lot as recruiters in the construction sector, that we get a lot of people that come from the consultancy side tend to jump into the contracting side because of the experience and exposure that they have at that, specialisms, certain specialisms and disciplines. But we tend to always see that the ones that are kind of more, maybe not as robust as such, they tend to go back because they prefer I don't want to say that it's not necessarily like you say the faster pace, it's not a slower pace as such, but being a little bit more entrenched into the project. In a design phase, I think, and that's something that my brother-in-law certainly did as well. He enjoyed the contracting side, but I think for him specifically, it was probably maybe a little bit too fast-paced. But I think you have to, test yourself, don't you, in those different environments?
Yeah, absolutely, and then also being exposed to the different trades and learning about the design and the engineering elements so that you can put it together, which I learned over the years. So I'm sort of fluid in all the trades, all the disciplines, and not that I know it all, I'm still learning, but that exposure really, really helps.
And I was going to say, did you, when you made that transition to the general manager, as obviously coming from the consultancy side, what were the key aspects that you found coming from the consultancy side across to the contracting side that really kind of helped?
Well, I think that one of the things is just really being focused on the construction, on the estimating function, and how that's sort of the core of, especially when you're buying out the job, and how you bid on it in terms of,
Yeah.
labor, materials, overhead, profit, equipment, and how you're going to make, it can make or break you based on what you've put in your bid, or your winning bid, and how the challenge of how to make a profit on that bid is ongoing. It's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah. I think it gives you that real kind of full-rounded experience and exposure now, right? Like you say, you've kind of done it all, and I think, like you say, every day's a school day. You're learning constantly, but you clearly have a really kind of full spectrum of construction and multidisciplines and contracting and consulting. Where would you say is probably the most exciting part for you specifically within the construction phase?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Because I do like it all, but I really like connecting with the team out in the field, and just being out there connecting with the skill staff, and making sure they have everything they need, or if there are any problems that I can help resolve. That, for me, I love it. I love to see everyone come together, and me to connect. I guess it's the human connection that I like, as well as, being outside of the office and walking around in my construction boots.
I was going to say, because it's a rarity that people from the consultancy side, don't necessarily like to get their hands dirty as such, but you've obviously got that, that full love and passion for the whole of the construction industry, which is quite a rarity.
Yeah, but for example, I was working on a project where we found a underground stream, and we were having some groundwater issues, and they were trying to put in this manhole, and they were like, is it going to float? Will it sink? Whatever. So I was excited. I was like, okay, yeah, let me do the calculation. So it's those kinds of situations that I just really enjoy.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think it's, like you say, it gives you a really, a real solid kind of background into the full construction phase. So you were the first black PMO director at the Port Authority, right, for New York, New Jersey. Yep. What did that moment kind of mean to you, and how did you approach that?
Oh, that's interesting, because I never really thought about it as the first black PMO director, but yeah, it's a great honor. I also thought of it, thought more of it as the first ever human PMO director in the agency's history, that I happen to be African American or black. So I didn't really think about it in terms of being the first black PMO director. But my general approach was just to create a center of excellence, and with the highest global standards. That was my goal. And then 10 years later, after leaving the Port Authority, I was honored with a Trailblazer and Exemplar Award for creating the agency's first PMO.
Wow, and you clearly have. I've seen some of your accolades. I think that that was the. I don't know where that fits in your list of accolades, but there's an abundance of them. So look, you've obviously blended the consulting, business development, and teaching. Where do you see those kind of worlds intersecting into your leadership approach?
Oh, that's great. So with business development, it's more of connecting with people, and knowing the technical aspects of the job. And then the teaching is also, coincidentally, is about connecting with people. And how this leads to my leadership style is, I believe in more of being a transformational leader. I like to inspire other people, and I love when I'm teaching people, when the light bulb goes off and they find that inner confidence of, oh yeah, I can do this. And then on the business development, sales, people connection, in part, because I'm kind of a extroverted person, I like connecting with people and just really genuinely get to know them. And what I found out is that, I've built these relationships over the years where I can just pick up the phone and say, hey, John, Joe, I need blah blah blah, or it's just building those relationships because this is a people business,
Yeah.
and those relationships, that's the key to your unique selling proposition is actually the individual selling because people buy, or they will, if they like you, they'll like what you're proposing. So
Yeah.
I've learned that
It's
over
that
the
old
years.
adage, isn't it, that people buy from people, and it is that, doesn't
Absolutely.
doesn't matter what you sell. I think you have to have that human connection at any base level, regardless of what you're selling. Because if somebody doesn't like the sound of your voice or the look of your face, then you aren't selling anything.
No, even if the product is great or it sells
Yeah,
itself.
exactly.
Correct.
And something I found that was quite fascinating as well. But on the complete opposite side, you're classically trained, right? A classically trained baritone, is that right?
Yes.
Wow. So how did the arts enter your life, and kind of what, how's that kind of informed your professional journey? 'Cause It's
Oh,
it's it's quite rare.
yeah, it is. I'm a unicorn. Uh, so I was always interested in the arts from a kid. Draw, paint. I played trombone, piano. As a matter of fact, my father reminded me of, I used to mock opera singers, and so it was a hobby that turned professional when I moved from Texas to the New York region. I joined a chorus, and they were like, "Wow, you have a really good ear for languages." And then I started studying. Took some classes at Juilliard, and the next thing I knew, I had connected with a conductor who became my mentor, and I was on the stage doing a few small roles in front of an audience of like 15,000. Loved it,
Wow.
and then over the years, just kept honing that craft. It turned professional, and then I started doing lead roles, and it just sort of evolved, and I always kept that element as well as keeping my professional element, and I did both. So challenging at times, but I was loving both elements. So people have always asked, well, would you like to do just singing, or would you like to do just engineering? I was like, no, I like singing and I like engineering, so I like both of them, and I'm not going to give up one or the other because it's the both of them that combine that keeps my interest.
That's amazing. I think, well, at least you've always got somewhere to take a client if you really want to wine and dine them, right? And surprise them. Just suddenly the curtain
Absolutely.
drops and there you are.
Actually, when I had my own company for 6 years, I would invite I had a couple of performances at Carnegie Hall as one of the soloists, and I would give them tickets to see me
Yeah,
perform.
I bet you did. That's a
Uh,
great introduction. Yeah, but come down,
Great
come
tool,
down.
right?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I'm sitting here trying to think to myself, do I have any skills that are anywhere like that? No, probably don't. That's why I tend to use sport arenas when I'm doing a bit of business development. It always seems to work.
That works.
Yeah. So when you're obviously at PACO Group, you're overseeing major infrastructure programs. What's the biggest challenge that you've got in managing such high stakes, projects across multiple sectors?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is I think it's communication. That's every large project. It's really when projects fail, the common theme of why they fail is because of communication. And I know it seems oversimplified, but the breakdown of communication. You hear the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, but it's really sitting down with I'm really happy to talk about like the agile approach and how that helps in your communication and frequent feedback loops so that everyone knows what's happening on the team and giving them that big vision of where you're going and how their contribution is important. That's the most crucial part of managing a really big, high stake project.
I can imagine because it doesn't matter what project that you're on, right? It's big or small. There's obviously moving parts, but you start thinking about large scale infrastructure projects that you're dealing with, and there's so many moving parts that there's so much that can go wrong. And I think you are right in thinking, suggesting that communication, that seems like such a basic human tool, is going to be the thing that makes or breaks the project.
Right, and what I try to tell people, if I'm supervising project managers, it's like, if you have a problem on the project, don't try to fix it and not tell anyone. Tell everybody this is the problem, and let's collaboratively try to work out the problem. But sometimes, PMs figure, well, oh my God, I can't let everyone know that this is slipping, or I can't. That's the worst thing you can do, the absolute worst. So early identification just gets everybody involved, and you can hopefully rapidly solve the problem.
And you find that being a problem? Because we've spoken to a number of different people on the podcast, and a lot of that comes down to kind of this, I don't want to say a macho bravado, but that kind of sense within construction that people don't want to be seen to be doing things wrong, and almost afraid to talk. And I know you look at the mental health issues and stuff and whatnot, and I'm sure we'll discuss parts of that. But do you find that's something that can cause lots of problems, or things that you've seen that have caused problems on projects where people are just too scared to I guess, shout that they've done something wrong or they're seeing a problem?
Yeah, I think it's just a natural inclination is that you don't want to be blamed for a problem, or you think you can solve it yourself, and it just 9 times out of 10 it escalates and balloons into something else. But one of the things that I do is on some of the major projects is we involve a robust risk management program where you go through the risk workshop on the qualitative side, and everyone has, all the SMEs, subject matter experts, are assigned a risk, and they become the risk owner. So that takes some of the element of surprise of you know what the risk is, what it could be, what the impact could be, and then you run the quantitative Monte Carlo results, and you know what your contingency pot is, whether it's a P70 or P80, but that gives you better handle on managing. Everyone is aware when you have the risk workshop who all the risk owners are and what the status is and what are the next risks that are going to hit the project in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and you have a collaborative discussion. So that kind of avoids that silo of the project manager keeping everything to himself, or where it's bigger than the project manager, and you have all the other risk owners that are stakeholders in the project.
Yeah, I think, like you say, having kind of pre-planning and making sure that you are kind of diversifying that risk should hopefully negate some of the problems that you might see further down the line. What have you kind of learned? You've obviously built some, really strong project cultures across public sector and private sector projects. What have you learned about building those strong cultures and how to go about doing that, especially when you've got massive teams?
Correct. I think the best approach is for all the stakeholders, everyone on the team, see the big picture, and keep them updated on the big picture, and show them or appreciate their individual contribution, because without it we can't make the big picture, because no one's role is as a team approach, no one's role is more important than the other person. It's the collaborative team effort that gets the goal. And that, combined with, as I was saying previously, with strong communication, that keeps everyone plugged in. But I think that and give them high level updates on what's happening on the higher end of the project, the entire team. And it's good to have really good team meetings for updates on the big picture, and I think that really helps.
Yeah, that sounds the right way to do things. It's bringing people on that journey and keeping that constant level of communication is probably going to resolve some of those problems. I mean, obviously, construction's known for, the issues that are known in construction of the shortages of skilled trades and management and engineers. There's a shortage across pretty much every discipline across construction, and we see that within our recruitment phase. What kind of challenges have you faced when building and recruiting for your own teams, and how have you overcome them?
A great question and a great source of frustration on our end. So what we're seeing, especially, in the construction industry, and this is, I just saw a report on CNN, and they're stating that when people graduate out of college, if they have a choice to do a white collar job or a construction job, even if the construction project job or the trade makes twice as much as the white collar job, they're going to gravitate toward the white collar job. So that's the trend that's happening right now that we're seeing. The other trend is, I sit on the board of President's Board from RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and the President's report was talking about. We had a discussion about in 2009, the recession of 2009. People stopped having children, and because of that, they're going to be anticipating. All the schools are going to be anticipating a downward spiral of admissions.
Oh, wow.
Connecting the dots, that means we're going to have even a wider shortage of skills in the next few years. So that's going to be a challenge, and I think that how do we overcome that challenge is, I think we're going to have a lure of a higher pay range and benefits to attract and keep the talent.
And I guess, do you find that that's, I say driven by, but social media and technology is obviously a massive positive for construction, and it helps the implementation of various different things across construction. But for the wider society and the gap and the problems that it creates in terms of people wanting to get into the sector, do you see that as a big problem, that it's caused a bit of a problem with people wanting to come into construction because they're seeing things like becoming a YouTuber as a more viable career?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think we have a generation that they want to be, like you said, be a social media guru and make millions of dollars without doing any work. And or you have people wanting to go into become a white collar executive, but not realizing that road that's a long road, and that you could make more, you could be more in a more lucrative profession by having a skill, being a trade, you can start your own trade business. You could go national, global rather quickly. But I think there's just a lack of knowledge or lack of perception of the differences between the trades and the white collar professions. And I think that better communication in terms of showing people their paths and having people go or get into careers that they truly enjoy. So if you have a knack for carpentry or whatever, it's nothing wrong with that, and you can have quite a lucrative career. But I think the younger generation, there's a lack of information, and there's a total perception that it's a job that's beneath them.
Yeah,
I think that's the issue.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I sit there and think to myself. I mean, I'm close to 40 now, and I think probably my parents' generation, and maybe in between. My business partner is kind of 12, 15 years older than I am, and he remembers that his school fairs and stuff, it was very much talking about construction and trades, to become a tradesperson. That was constantly discussed in the curriculum of on the trade fairs. But I remember when I was at school, I don't think I ever heard about the construction industry in terms of being able to kind of build a career into it. It just wasn't something that was discussed. I kind of fell into the recruitment aspects of construction. But do you kind of see that changing? We're kind of needing to go full circle now and starting to really implement that in schools and like you say, to turn it back into a not necessarily a sexy job, but a job that's a really viable career that you can make a lot of money from and a skill for life.
Correct, and I think that has to be communicated, and I think that the construction industry should make an effort to sort of paint that picture and make it more attractive and more appealing to the younger generation, or we're going to have an issue. Especially if we want to bring manufacturing jobs and other jobs back to the U.S. It's going to be a very big challenge to fill those jobs.
Yeah, I see that. Obviously the whole political drive for that at the moment. It's fantastic from a political aspect, right? And it makes sense. But like you say, on the ground level, you're sitting there saying, okay, well, who's going to do this? If on one hand we've got the whole immigration issues and whatnot across the globe, who's actually going to fill the jobs that you need, especially when you've got an industry such as construction, which is vital and for the infrastructure of people's lives, that's not got enough people in it to fulfill the jobs that you already have.
Right.
It's a tricky thing to navigate, right? I think that's great.
Yes.
So, do you find that then, bringing in top quality talent's always going to be an issue, right? Have you seen that same problem manifest itself at leadership level?
Good question. So at the leadership level, yes. And what's happening in the public arena is that we get a lot of, because a lot of the public agencies are also having issues with executive or high level skill people to run some of the agencies. Mm-hmm. And what we have is now some of the people are being poached by some of the consultants to join agencies. We had quite a few people that have been poached by agencies to join their effort.
And are you going to start seeing almost like, do you think, a bit of a trade war in terms of salary to keep the pendulum swinging one way and the other?
And so what happens is, typically in the public agencies, our consultants, we have an overhead and a markup, but what the lure is, especially for some of these large agencies, is that you get a pension as well. Even though we have a 401k, but they have a pension system on top of health benefits for life and for them and their family, and that's a nice, attractive lure for someone that's looking to maybe retire in 10 years. And that's the appeal. It's not salary driven, but it's
that long term
based on the benefits.
Yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's a constant kind of battle. I think when you've got the public sector competing against the private sector, and it's we see it a lot, that you see that I guess the package challenge where you've got the public sector that are offering better rates, and the private sector offer better rates, and the pendulum does swing in between. So it's always driving some level of competition. Correct. Sometimes to ask, in terms of projects, you've obviously worked on some massive projects and some really kind of important infrastructure projects. What's one or two that you've really worked on that you're most proud of, that you look at and you think to yourself, I was involved in doing that?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, most recently, our company, along with Tectonic, we helped shape the MTA's project lifecycle process, which took about 2 years. And why we're so proud of that is that it was a real sea change for the organization, because they were doing things a certain way, and with the new life cycle, there's a whole different way of doing projects through select, defined, and execute phases. And we created schedule templates, and we had workshops for all all the different departments to train them how to use to optimize the schedule as a tool to manage the projects, and we got feedback, and I'm really happy that we've made a significant change to the organization, and I'm very proud of the work that we did.
Superb. Yes. Yeah, a big challenge to change a direction that an authority like the NTAs is going. So, congratulations on that. Something else that you've obviously performed at Carnegie Hall, and with opera countries across the country. But what's the biggest lesson that the stage has taught you about leadership?
Having performed in many venues where things never go quite as planned, you learn to be agile, you learn to be adaptable, you learn to learn how to read the room, you learn how to collaborate with other people, you learn how to, when there's a conflict, how to have emotional intelligence to talk to the conductor. For example, if the conductor calls me out on something in front of everyone, I won't say anything back, but I'll go to him in private and have a conversation, because you don't do those things.
Yeah, don't chew me out in front of everybody. Don't do that.
Yeah, so I'll just say yes or thank you, and then have that conversation offline and discuss it. But, so there's always, in terms of how that turns into leadership, is, again, having emotional intelligence, knowing how to connect with people, knowing how to read the room. On the stage, transports to how to read a room when you're doing an oral presentation.
Yeah.
And what to say, what not to say, and how to present yourself, because it could change. For example, when I perform, every audience is different, even though it's the same performance. I can feel the energy, for example, on a Friday night versus a Saturday night. The energies are complete. Every audience is different, and it's the same way when you go into business meetings, and you have to learn how to read that energy and know how to adapt and adjust.
Yeah, that's a great.
And the show must go on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that, like you said, the world keeps turning. But that's a great thing for the listeners, right? Is that if you want to become a leader in any aspect of life, you have to learn to read the room and be able to be adaptable and dynamic in that approach. So that's superb bit of advice. Obviously balancing arts that you've done. I think I've been told by the research team you've done a lot of athletics, and you obviously executive roles that you've done. How do you kind of stay centered in all of managing all of those different things, and what keeps you going?
That's a good question. I think that the athletic part came at a time where I needed to pay attention to my health, and I saw that it was out of balance, and so it just, one thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, I was doing triathlons and marathons. But the same principle that applies to everything in my life. Everything that I do at 100%, or not at all. So it's and that focus is I apply to what I do on my job. I do everything 100%. I drive. I have persistence and drive in my business aspect, as well as my singing career, as well as triathlons and Ironman type of activities.
Well, something else that the research team pulled up is apparently you've even swum from Alcatraz. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, I did.
Wow.
I'll never do that.
Hopefully you weren't breaking out, were you?
No, but I think that it was only I think it was a 1.5 mile swim, which is the first leg of the Ironman triathlon. But the thing that I didn't like about that swim is the water was super cold.
I was going to say, because I'm sure that's part of the reason they built it there, right? Is that the tide's extremely difficult, the water's freezing, and you managed to swim it. Fair play.
Yeah, well, they do it every year, and I'll after you get over the water temperature, your next enemy is the current.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, you find yourself swimming back round the other side.
I kept getting pushed toward the Golden Gate Bridge and then coming back, and then so. But I imagine if I did it a number of times, I would improve on my efficiency. But anyway, it was
Well,
quite a challenge.
it's fair play. It's a bit of a that's a great feat. I mean, I've been to Alcatraz and I've been on a boat, and I'm pretty sure that the boat crossing was getting pushed across. So fair play to you doing it. I don't think
Yeah,
you'd
I
ever
mean,
see me again if it was me.
well, I was always a good swimmer from. I didn't learn how to swim until I was 12, but by 14 I was on the swim team. So swimming also came kind of natural to me. So.
Fair play. That's immense. Kind of moving on to a little back to the kind of professional aspects. What advice would you give to young professionals that are aspiring to become leaders in infrastructure or project management?
Well, if they really love, first they have to have a love for the industry and not go after money.
Yeah.
And when you love what you're doing, the element of work or the perception of work sort of diminishes a little bit.
Hmm.
To be patient, be willing to do the grunt work because it all leads to a cumulative experience over time, and not expect an overnight. Nothing happens overnight. It's you can have a goal. Hey, I want to be the president of XYZ, but that goal that dream will only happen if you are consistent and you have your drive and you keep focus on your day to day. And over time, you'll get there. But
Yeah, I think
a
you're
lot
right.
of people will give up if they don't have success within the next, within 5 years, and like, oh, I'm going to get into another. But like, nothing in life works that way. So
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's that old saying, isn't it? I'm an overnight success, and I think, I think that's one thing that social media has probably played, and technological advancements have probably played, you know, in the wrong direction. I would think that they don't get to see the hard work behind the scenes. That you mentioned A to X, Y, and Z. I think ultimately people expect to go from A to Z without going through the rest of the alphabet, and I think that's the problem with most people. So, yeah, great advice. Another thing, what's one of the major kind of construction capital project space? What would you say that they need to do to evolve?
oh, that's a great question. So I think to approach digitalization in terms of AI and BIM and that embracing that fully, because typically the construction industry we're considered laggards in terms of technology, and getting that on a more robust platform, especially in terms of machine learning for predictive maintenance, in terms of certain equipment and machinery and transportation type projects, but even in building systems and whatnot, we can really leverage that to accelerate the industry.
And how do you see that? I mean, talking about AI, it's obviously the common discussion at the moment. Everybody's talking about it in every industry. How do you see that impacting, both positively and negatively on the construction industry, from your perspectives?
Well, I positively, it's going to really make things a lot. Especially with generative AI, you can do a lot of things better, faster, in terms of some of your designs, some of your layouts of, for example, your BIM with the Revit package. You can do real quick clash detection that saves a lot of time.
I was going to say that.
Prior to that, you would make these conflict drawings or whatever, and it would take a lot of effort to go through, even with a CAD model just in 3D to do your clash detection. But now it could be done much faster. That's one example. So the perception that it's going to take away, the negative is that it's going to take away from construction workers. No, I think that my response to that is you're going to add a bigger skill base, and those individuals can actually learn how to use the technology to make their jobs easier as well. I mean, look what's happened in surveying. Look what's happening in the BIM modeling. Now, where the challenge is because everything is not digitally located in terms of, especially with utilities and as-built drawings, because you don't, even though you have the as-built drawings, they're not correct, and so that's just going to take decades, eons, generations for it to get all the utility grid work in a place where it could be used for a BIM type system. So that would be a negative, and that's going to be always ever challenging in the industry.
Yeah, like you say, I think there's going to be some positives, but I think like any kind of transformation in any industry, you've got to learn to upskill yourself, right, and adapt that technology and utilize it for for the greater good. So, what kind of legacy do you want to kind of leave in the construction industry when you kind of finally hang up your dusty boots and you think to yourself, right, I'm ready to kind of give way? What sort of legacy would you like to leave behind? Both.
That's a good
and that's a good question, both in the field and on the stage as well. We'll go for both.
Oh. Yeah, so I think that I see them both together, and I guess the legacy that I'd like to leave is to follow your passion, and I guess a person that followed his passion and had a great ride. I think that's that's about it. It's pretty simple, but
that's what any one man can ask for, right? I think is that.
Yeah, and hopefully to inspire others to just go for their passion, go for their dreams, go for, don't be too risk averse. As I tell people, I tell younger people, I say, listen, life is so risky that no one makes it out alive, so you might as well do what you enjoy. Great perspective, right?
It is. That is absolutely brilliant. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to take that. I'm going to use that now. Thank you for that. I'm going to pretend that was mine.
Okay, it's yours.
So I guess it leads me to the next question. What would you say to 25-year-old Fred who was starting out in the industry? If you could go back.
Tell him, if I could go back, and I would tell him to be to keep doing what I'm doing, just to have more confidence. My confidence came later in life, but at that point, I didn't have a lot of confidence, and that's what I would tell my previous self, because I didn't know at the time that I had a talent for singing, and that so a lot of things just sort of evolved, and then so I would just say to my 25-year-old self, stick to your guns, follow your passion, and have more confidence in your decisions.
Yeah, I think everybody can take something from that, because it's funny, isn't it, that wisdom comes at a later age, and so does hindsight, right? Hindsight is
right.
that one.
Always 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So something we always do in closing is a question I always ask. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing right now that would have the greatest impact on the construction sector, what would it be?
I would say real-time communication, real-time project information, using the latest technologies, because that's usually the problem on projects, is not having enough real-time data. And some of these large projects, by the time you set the data date and by the time you get the information, it's a month later. And then other things have happened. So I think that real-time updates, and that would be really, if I had the magic wand and could do that tomorrow, that's what I would implement immediately.
And I guess just kind of following on from that, do you see AI being that tool that could help with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm sure there's somebody scurrying away now, making putting the old programming codes together, and is going to be a billionaire, I'm sure pretty soon.
Right.
Well, Fred, look, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on and to speak to you. A man of many talents, clearly, and some sound advice for all of the listeners, and certainly youngsters that are trying to come into the industry can learn a lot from the wisdom that you've shared.
Well, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and appreciate being a guest on your show.
Thank you very much. Take care.